You're about to turn the key, and that one choice can either save your season or destroy your power head. Because most outboard failures don't start with a bang. They start with a weak telltale, a new warning beep, or a fluid that suddenly looks off. The trap? The engine will still idle. So you convince yourself it's fine, and you run it anyway. But here's the twist. The damage usually happens after that moment, when you add load while the cooling is marginal, the oil is compromised, or the lower unit is already taking on water. By the end of this video, you'll know the 3 stop signs that mean do not start, and the exact order to check cooling, lubrication, fuel, the gear case, and voltage before you ever touch the throttle. Don't run your outboard again until you watch this. The 3 stop signs before you touch the ignition. The most expensive mistake on a boat is rarely a single dramatic moment. It is usually a quiet decision made when everything looks almost normal. You notice something that feels different. You tell yourself it is probably fine, and you push the concern into later because you want the day to start. The engine fires, settles into an idle, and that doubt gets buried under momentum. So, before we talk about parts, you need 3 stop signs that override the plan. The first stop sign is a cooling stream that looks wrong. A strong telltale is not proof that everything is perfect, but a weak telltale is a warning you can see with your own eyes. If the stream is sputtering, fading, or missing, treat it like a sign that water flow might be marginal, and marginal cooling is how small issues become powerhead damage. The second stop sign is any new alarm, light, or protective behavior. Modern outboards can keep running while they are protecting themselves. You might feel a sudden limit in power, a rough idle that comes and goes, or a refusal to climb in revolutions per minute, the way it normally does. That is the electronic control unit, choosing survival, and it usually means something measurable has moved outside the expected range. The third stop sign is fluid, that comes back with a story. Gear case lubricant that looks milky, engine oil that smells like gasoline, or fuel that looks cloudy is evidence, not a quirk. Those clues rarely improve by adding load. Keep it grounded. Each sign can have a simple cause, like debris in the telltale outlet or low battery voltage. The danger is not the symptom by itself. The danger is ignoring the symptom and asking for a long, hot run anyway. The badge on the cowl does not change the rule. A warning deserves a pause. Confirm the cause, then add load. That applies to a Yamaha 150 horsepower 4-stroke, a Mercury Verado 250 horsepower, or a Suzuki 300 horsepower. So, before any throttle, start with cooling. Telltale flow is the one clue you can watch in real time. Plus, it can fool quick glances. Cooling that fails quietly until it does. At first it looks harmless. A thin stream, a little sputter, maybe a brief gap when the engine first catches. You tell yourself it will strengthen as the motor warms, because you have seen that before. The problem is that yesterday is not a warranty. Cooling is one of the few systems that can go from mild to serious in the time it takes to leave the no-wake zone. The cooling stream people watch is only the visible hint of a bigger process. Inside the midsection, a rubber water pump impeller is trying to pull water up through the intakes, build pressure, and push flow through passages that can narrow over time. Rubber ages. A pump housing can wear. A tiny piece of sand can score surfaces. None of that announces itself with a bang. It announces itself with a stream that does not look like the last trip. If the telltale is weak, the safest move is not to test it by running faster. The safest move is to stop, clear the easy point first, and then verify whether the stream becomes strong and steady. If it does not, you assume the problem is real until proven otherwise. You check the intake screens. You check for weeds. You check for a plastic bag that is half attached and half floating. If all that looks clean, you start thinking about the pump, the impeller, and the pump housing. Big horsepower changes the stakes. A larger outboard is often pushing a heavier hull, carrying more people and spending more time under load. A 150 horsepower engine that is asked to run hard for long periods has less margin for maybe it will be fine than a small motor that idles around a calm shoreline. That is why overheating stories often involve modern four-stroke engines in the 150 to 300 horsepower range, the kind that cost real money to repair. There is also a trap that catches careful people. The stream can look acceptable while cooling is still marginal. Deposits inside passages, a thermostat that does not behave consistently, or a pressure relief valve that is sticky can create a situation where idle cooling seems fine but load cooling is not. You do not always get a clean warning early. Sometimes you get a gradual rise in temperature, a hint of steam, or a smell that is easy to blame on the sun. So use more than your eyes. Listen for a change in tone. Pay attention to the way the engine settles. A motor that is not happy can sound sharper or strained, even before it alarms. If your engine has a temperature display, treat trends as information, not trivia. If it starts climbing in a way it never used to, you take that seriously. Cooling teaches discipline because it punishes denial. Once you respect that, you are ready for the next trap, the one that can damage parts quietly even when the engine sounds fine at idle. If this is making you rethink what you would actually buy used, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, and hit like if you have ever walked away from a motor that seemed fine. Comment. Below, stock only, light mods, dealer mods, DIY upgrades, or never risk it. Lubrication problems that sound like nothing. A lot of owners expect lubrication trouble to be loud. They imagine smoke, grinding, or a clear knock that forces the throttle closed. In reality, lubrication problems often begin as silence. The engine starts clean, it idles smooth, and the first sign is not a sound at all. It is a smell, a level change, or a pattern you only notice if you are looking for it. There are two different worlds here. In one world, the engine is a two-stroke that relies on oil delivery through injection or premix. In the other world, the engine is a four-stroke that relies on crankcase oil and pressure. Both can fail, but they fail in different ways, and the wrong reaction is the same, running it harder to see if it clears up. With a two-stroke, the danger is interrupted oil delivery, a cracked line, a loose clamp, an air bubble at the wrong time, or a pump that is not moving oil. The way it should can turn a healthy cylinder into a scored one. The scary part is that the engine might still feel strong for a short stretch. When the change finally becomes audible, the wear has already happened. That is why technicians treat any oil delivery question as urgent, even if the motor still idles, like nothing is wrong. With a four-stroke, the trap is often fuel dilution or overfilling. If the oil level rises unexpectedly, if the oil smells like gasoline, or if it looks much thinner than it should, fuel might be getting into the crankcase. That can happen from more than one cause, and it is not something you fix by taking a long, hot run. A long run can spread the problem and accelerate wear. Overfilling is another quiet mistake. People add oil just in case, but too much oil can foam at higher revolutions per minute. Foamy oil does not lubricate bearings the way a stable film does. If the engine is already warm, already under load, or already running slightly lean from another issue, reduced lubrication is how a manageable day turns into an expensive season. Here is a grounded check that takes under a minute. You check the oil level on level ground. You smell the dipstick. You look for sudden change. You do not need to be a laboratory to notice that something is off. And if you have a two-stroke oil tank, you confirm level, and you look at the lines for cracks or seepage. Tiny leaks matter, because they often hint at air entry. Modern engines do have sensors for oil pressure and temperature, but sensors are not time machines. They warn you when a threshold is crossed, not when the first seconds of wear begin. That is why human checks still matter, even if the dashboard looks calm. On popular platforms such as a Yamaha 150 horsepower four-stroke, those checks are often what separates long life from expensive surprises. The dock test can lie. Fuel faults show up as hesitation only after throttle input, so we move into filters, primer, bulbs, hose leaks, plus simple checks. Fuel that turns small, hesitation into big heat. Fuel problems are frustrating because they often hide behind good manners. The motor starts. The idle is clean. You back off the trailer and everything feels normal. Then, when you roll into throttle and load rises, the engine hesitates, surges, or feels like it is running out of breath. That gap between idle and load is where people get trapped, because they assume the problem will disappear if they push past it. The first fuel trap is water. Not a full tank of water, just enough to change combustion and corrode sensitive parts. If you have a water-separating fuel filter with a clear bowl, it is one of the most honest windows on the boat. Cloudiness, separation, or debris in that bowl is not something you ignore because the engine still runs. It is something you address before injectors, and high-pressure pumps are forced to swallow the mess. The second trap is blended gasoline. Many pumps supply gasoline mixed with alcohol, often around 10%. When that blend sits and the tank breathes humid air, the fuel can change. The details depend on storage and temperature swings, so you do not guess. You check. The third trap is air. A tiny air leak at a fitting can allow air to enter without allowing fuel to drip out. Under load, that can create a lean condition. Lean running is heat, and heat is where the cost leaps from inconvenience to damage. So the routine is simple. You squeeze the primer bulb until it is firm. If it never firms up, that is information. If it firms up and then quickly goes soft, that is also information. You look at hoses for cracks, stiffness, and wetness around clamps. You drain a small fuel sample into a clear container if you can, because the fuel will tell you the truth faster than your confidence will. On modern fuel-injected engines, restrictions matter. A partially clogged filter or a contaminated vapor separator tank can allow the motor to idle perfectly and still starve at higher load. That is why a common story sounds like this. The engine is fine until you ask it to carry the boat. Then it refuses to hold power. When that happens, the worst choice is to keep forcing throttle to see if it clears. Across the big brands, the pattern repeats. The engine depends on stable fuel delivery, and it is sensitive to contamination. When it protects itself, it may limit revolutions per minute. When it cannot, the damage can start quietly. If fuel is the sneaky system, the next one is the gambler. It can look perfectly fine from the outside, then fail in a way that leaves you with no propulsion at all. The lower unit clues. Most people skip. It is easy to treat the lower unit like a separate world, because it is down in the water, and it usually stays quiet. But it is carrying every bit of torque the engine makes, and when it fails, it tends to fail without mercy. The worst part is that the early clues are often visible, and people still miss them because they are focused on the power head. Start with the simplest clue: lubricant condition, gear case. Lubricant should look consistent, not creamy. When it comes out milky, that usually means water has entered the gear case. Water can enter through worn seals, through a damaged propeller shaft seal, or through a cut caused by fishing line that wrapped tight and acted like a blade. Owners often discover it late because the engine still shifts and still pushes the boat, right up until bearings and gears start complaining. Then there is the drain plug magnet. A light paste of fine material can be normal depending on hours and service interval. Shiny flakes, gritty chunks, or glitter that looks like metal dust is a different conversation. That is where you stop and decide whether you are about to load a gear case that is already chewing itself. Keep it grounded again. Milky oil does not always mean the gear case is destroyed. It can be an early seal issue. It can be a minor intrusion that is caught in time. But it almost never improves by running hard because heat and load move water deeper into places it does not belong. A quick inspection helps. Look around the propeller for fishing line. Look for fresh oil seepage around the seal area. Pay attention to new vibration because a bent propeller or a propeller with missing material can stress bearings and seals. People sometimes blame the engine for a vibration that is really a propeller problem, and that delay gives the gear case time to worsen. If you are running a larger outboard, the stakes rise because the torque is higher. A 200 to 300 horsepower setup can turn a marginal bearing into a failure faster than a smaller engine that never sees heavy load. That is why gear case maintenance is not optional if you do long runs. Now we move from mechanical clues to the warning language. The engine speaks through lights, tones, and protective behavior. Sensors, voltage, and protective. Modes. The first sign is often subtle. The starter sounds a little slower. A screen flickers for a moment. A warning tone happens once, then vanishes. Because it vanishes, people assume it was nothing. In reality, electrical issues are famous for showing up as ghost symptoms long before they show up as a no start. Modern outboards rely on computers and sensors to make decisions in real time. The engine control module reads temperature, oil pressure, throttle position, and other signals, then adjusts fuel and timing to keep the engine healthy. That system only works as well as the information it receives, and information can get messy when voltage is low or grounds are weak. A tired battery, a corroded terminal, or a loose connection can make a good sensor look bad and make a real problem look random. This is where arguments begin. Someone blames too much technology. Someone else blames a single sensor. The grounded truth is that both can be right depending on the day. A sensor can fail, a connector can loosen, but low voltage can also cause a cascade of false readings that make everything look unreliable. The fix is not guessing. The fix is starting with the power supply and working outward. Begin with what you can verify. Battery terminals should be clean and tight. Grounds should be solid. Cables should not be green, with corrosion under insulation. If the engine cranks weak, you do not keep cycling the key as if persistence will charge the battery. Repeated weak cranking can drop voltage even further and trigger more confusing behavior. Now talk about protective behavior. Many owners call it guardian mode. But the idea is simple. The engine limits itself to reduce damage risk. You may feel an unexpected ceiling in revolutions per minute or a refusal to build power. That is not the engine being dramatic. It is the engine saying that something does not meet the conditions for full output. Sometimes the cause is heat. Sometimes it is low oil pressure. Sometimes it is a sensor reading that becomes unreliable because the electrical supply is unstable. If your outboard uses digital throttle and shift, stable voltage matters even more because the controls are electronic. A moment of poor electrical supply can create strange behavior that feels mechanical. This is why a simple battery test and connection inspection can solve problems that people try to fix by replacing expensive parts. There is room for careful speculation here. Intermittent warnings often show up only under certain conditions. Heat soak after a long, idle, heavy trim changes, or vibration at a certain range. That does not mean the warning is imaginary. It means the system is right on the edge, and one more season can push it over. When you treat warnings as honest signals, you stop trying to overpower the engine into silence. You start looking for root cause. And once you do that, you are ready for the final piece. What you do when you cannot fix it immediately, but you still need to stay safe. The backup plan and the 7-minute ritual. Most people think the solution to risk is more horsepower, more electronics, more upgrades. When a main engine starts giving warnings, the most damaging decision is often not the mechanical issue itself. It is the choice to keep running the same engine because you feel you have no other option. That is why experienced owners quietly love a small auxiliary outboard. It is not there to race. It is there to keep you in control when the main engine refuses to cooperate. A 9.9 horsepower to 15 horsepower auxiliary can hold a course, keep the bow off a hazard, and get you to safety without forcing the main engine to work through a problem. Dealers do not always advertise that advice, but they see the invoices that come from limping a sick engine home under load. A small auxiliary outboard does not replace maintenance, and it is not right for every boat. It needs its own fuel, its own care, an amount you can trust. But in the situations where it matters, it turns panic into patience. It gives you time to diagnose instead of gamble. Now, whether you have that auxiliary or not, you still need a routine. This is the 7-minute ritual that keeps you from making the one more start mistake. First, you look at water flow. You start the engine and watch the telltale stream long enough to see it stabilize. You do not accept weak or pulsing flow as normal. If it is different, you stop and find out why. Second, you check for warnings. Any new tone, light, or message earns a pause. You do not silence it with hope. You look for the reason, starting with simple things like low voltage. Third, you check lubrication. On a 4-stroke, you verify oil level and smell for gasoline. On a 2-stroke, you confirm oil supply and inspect lines for cracking or seepage. Fourth, you check fuel delivery. You squeeze the primer bulb, inspect hose connections, and look at the water separating filter. If the fuel looks cloudy or separated, you do not run hard just to burn it off. Fifth, you scan the lower unit and propeller area. Look for fishing line, fresh oil sheen, and anything that hints at seal trouble. If you recently hit something, treat that memory like evidence, not like a story. Sixth, you respect electricity. A clean, strong crank suggests healthy voltage. Slow cranking, flickering screens, or repeated beeps tells you to inspect battery terminals and grounds before you chase expensive parts. Seventh, you make the adult decision about the day. If something is off and you cannot confirm it quickly, you change the plan, stay close, run lightly, or postpone. That single choice prevents most of the failures people call random. None of this removes all risk. It simply shifts the odds back in your favor and keeps small clues from becoming big repairs. So, if you remember one thing, remember this. A good day on the water starts before the key turns. Changes in sound, flow, or fluid are messages. Ignore them and you gamble with expensive parts. This checklist isn't about fear. It's about control. Run it every time, especially after storage or new fuel. Subscribe for more practical engine advice that gets skipped, and comment below with a warning sign you once ignored and what it taught you.